had a protected mode kernel, which required an 80386 compatible processor, with LIM standard EMS emulation and VXD drivers in the kernel. All Windows and DOS-based applications at the time were real mode, and Windows/386 could run them over the protected mode kernel by using the virtual 8086 mode, which was new with the 80386 processor. Version 2.1 came out on the 27th of May, 1988, followed by version 2.11 on the 13th of March, 1989. They included a few minor changes. In Apple Computer, Inc. v. Microsoft Corporation, version 2.03, and later 3.0, faced challenges from Apple over its overlapping Windows and other features Apple charged mimicked the ostensibly copyrighted look and feel of its operating system and and generated a copy of the Macintosh in its OS. Judge William Schwartzer dropped all but 10 of Apple's 189 claims of copyright infringement, and ruled that most of the remaining 10 were over uncopyrightable ideas. 18. On the 31st of December, 2001, Microsoft declared Windows 2.x obsolete and stopped providing support and updates for the system. Windows 3.0. The logo of Windows 3.0 Windows 3.0, released in May 1990, improved capabilities given to native applications. It also allowed users to better multitask old MS-DOS-based software compared to Windows/386, thanks to the introduction of virtual memory. Windows 3.0's user interface finally resembled a serious competitor to the user interface of the Macintosh computer. PCs had improved graphics by this time, due to VGA video cards, and the protected /enhanced mode allowed Windows applications to use more memory in a more painless manner than their DOS counterparts could. Windows 3.0 could run in real, standard, or 386 enhanced modes, and was compatible with any Intel processor from the 8086/8088 up to the 80286 and 80386. This was the first version to run Windows programs in protected mode, although the 386 enhanced mode kernel was an enhanced version of the protected mode kernel in Windows/386. Windows 3.0 received 2 updates. A few months after introduction, Windows 3.0 was released as a maintenance release resolving bugs and improving stability. A multimedia version Windows 3.0 with multimedia extensions 1.0 was released in October 1991. This was bundled with multimedia upgrade kits comprising a CD-ROM drive and a sound card, such as the Creative Lab Sound Blaster Pro. This version was the precursor to the multimedia features available in Windows 3.1, first released in April 1992, and later, and was part of Microsoft's specification for the multimedia PC. The features listed above and growing market support from application software developers made Windows 3.0 wildly successful, selling around 10 million copies in the 2 years before the release of version 3.1. Windows 3.0 became a major source of income for Microsoft, and led the company to revise some of its earlier plans. Support was discontinued on the 31st of December, 2001. 19. OS/2. OS/2 logo. During the mid to late 1980s, Microsoft and IBM had cooperatively been developing OS/2 as a successor to DOS. OS/2 would take full advantage of the aforementioned protected mode of the Intel 80286 processor and up to 16 megabytes of memory. OS/2 1.0, released in 1987, supported swapping and multitasking and allowed running of DOS executables. IBM licensed Windows' GUI for OS/2 as Presentation Manager, and the two companies stated that it and Windows 2.0 would be almost identical. 20. Presentation Manager was not available with OS/2 until version 1.1, released in 1988. Its API was incompatible with Windows. Version 1.2, released in 1989, introduced a new file system, HPFS, to replace the FAT file system. By the early 1990s, conflicts developed in the Microsoft/IBM relationship. They cooperated with each other in developing their PC operating systems and had access to each other's code. Microsoft wanted to further develop Windows, while IBM desired for future work to be based on OS/2. In an attempt to resolve this tension, IBM and Microsoft agreed that IBM would develop OS/2 2.0, to replace OS/2 1.3 and Windows 3.0, while Microsoft would develop the next version, OS/23.0. This agreement soon fell apart, however, and the Microsoft/IBM relationship was terminated. IBM continued to develop OS/2, while Microsoft changed the name of its, as yet unreleased, OS/2 3.0 to Windows NT. Both retained the rights to use OS/2 and Windows technology developed up to the termination of the agreement. Windows NT, however, was to be written anew, mostly independently, see below. After an interim 1.3 version to fix up many remaining problems with the 1.x series, IBM released OS/2 version 2.0 in 1992. This was a major improvement. It featured a new, object-oriented GUI, the Workplace Shell, WPS, that included a desktop and was considered by many to be OS/2's best feature. Microsoft would later imitate much of it in Windows 95. Version 2.0 also provided a full 32-bit API, offered smooth multitasking and could take advantage of the 4 GB of address space provided by the Intel 80386. Still, much of the system had 16-bit code internally which required, among other things, device drivers to 16-bit code as well. This was one of the reasons for the chronic shortage of OS/2 drivers for the latest devices. Version 2.0 could also run DOS and Windows 3.0 programs, since IBM had retained the right to use the DOS and Windows code as a result of the breakup. Windows 3.1x. In response to the impending release of OS/2 2.0, Microsoft developed Windows 3.1, first released in April 1992, which included several improvements to Windows 3.0, such as display of TrueType scalable fonts, developed jointly with Apple, improved disk performance in 386 enhanced mode, multimedia support, and bug fixes. It also removed real mode, and only ran on an 80,286 or better processor. Later Microsoft also released Windows 3.11, a touch-up to Windows 3.1 which included all of the patches and updates that followed the release of Windows 3.1 in 1992. The logo of Windows 3.1.x, NT3.sh in 1992 and 1993. Microsoft released Windows for Workgroups, WFW, which was available both as an add-on for existing Windows 3.1 installations and in a version that included the base Windows environment and the networking extensions all in one package. Windows for Workgroups included improved network drivers and protocol stacks, and support for peer-to-peer networking. There were two versions of Windows for workgroups, WFW 3.1 and WFW 3.11. Unlike prior versions, Windows for Workgroups 3.11 ran in 386 enhanced mode only, and needed at least an 80386SX processor. One optional download for WFW was Wolverine TCP/IP protocol stack, which allowed for easy access to the Internet through corporate networks. All these versions continued version 3.0's impressive sales pace. Even though the 3.1x series still lacked most of the important features of OS/2, such as long file names, a desktop, or protection of the system against misbehaving applications, Microsoft quickly took over the OS and GUI markets for the IBM PC. The Windows API became the de facto standard for consumer software. On the 31st of December, 2001, Microsoft declared Windows 3.1 obsolete and stopped providing support and updates for the system. However, OEM licensing for Windows for Workgroups 3.11 on embedded systems continued to be available until November 1, 2008. 21. Windows NT 3.x. Meanwhile, Microsoft continued to develop Windows NT. The main architect of the system was Dave Cutler, one of the chief architects of VAX/VMS at Digital Equipment Corporation. 22. Microsoft hired him in October 1988 to create a successor to OS/2, but Cutler created a completely new system instead. Cutler had been developing a follow-on to VMS at December called Mica, and when December dropped, the project head brought the expertise and around 20 engineers with him to Microsoft. December also believed he brought Mica's code to Microsoft and sued. 23. Microsoft eventually paid $150 million and agreed to support each Alpha CPU chip in NT. Windows NT Workstation. Microsoft marketing wanted Windows NT to appear to be a continuation of Windows 3.1, arrived in beta form to developers at the July 1992 Professional Developers Conference in San Francisco. 24. Microsoft announced at the conference its intentions to develop a successor to both Windows NT and Windows 3.1's replacement. Windows 95, codenamed Chicago, which would unify the two into one operating system. This successor was codenamed Cairo. In hindsight, Cairo was a much more difficult project than Microsoft had anticipated, and, as a result, NT and Chicago would not be unified until Windows XP, albeit Windows 2000, oriented to business, had already unified most of the system's bowl-songed gears. It was XP that was sold to home consumers like Windows 95 and came to be viewed as the final unified OS. Parts of Cairo have still not made it into Windows as of 2020, most notably, the WinFS file system, which was the much-touted object file system of Cairo. Microsoft announced that they have discontinued the separate release of WinFS for Windows XP and Windows Vista. 25, and will gradually incorporate the technologies developed for WinFS in other products and technologies, notably Microsoft SQL Server. Driver support was lacking due to the increased programming difficulty in dealing with NT's superior hardware abstraction model. This problem plagued the NT line all the way through Windows 2000. Programmers complained that it was too hard to write drivers for NT, and hardware developers were not going to go through the trouble of developing drivers for a small segment of the market. Additionally, although allowing for good performance and fuller exploitation of system resources, it was also resource-intensive on limited hardware, and thus was only suitable for larger, more expensive machines. However, these same features made Windows NT perfect for the LAN server market, which in 1993 was experiencing a rapid boom, as office networking was becoming common. NT also had advanced network connectivity options and NTFS, an efficient file system. Windows NT version 3.51 was Microsoft's entry into this field, and took away market share from Novell, the dominant player, in the following years. One of Microsoft's biggest advances initially developed for Windows NT was a new 32-bit API, to replace legacy 16-bit Windows API. This API was called Win32, and from then on Microsoft referred to the older 16-bit API as Win16. The Win32 API had 3 levels of implementation. The complete one for Windows NT, a subset for Chicago, originally called Win32C, missing features primarily of interest to enterprise customers at the time, such as security and Unicode support, and a more limited subset called Win32S which could be used on Windows 3.1 systems. Thus Microsoft sought to ensure some degree of compatibility between the Chicago design and Windows NT, even though the two systems had radically different internal architectures. Windows NT was the first Windows operating system based on a hybrid kernel. The hybrid kernel was designed as a modified microkernel, influenced by the Mac microkernel developed by Richard Rashid at Carnegie Mellon University, but without meeting all of the criteria of a pure microkernel. As released, Windows NT 3.x went through 3 versions, 3.1, 3.5, and 3.51. Changes were primarily internal and reflected back-end changes. The 3.5 release added support for new types of hardware and improved performance and data reliability. The 3.51 release was primarily to update the Win32 APIs to be compatible with software being written for the Win32C APIs in what became Windows 95. Support for Windows NT 3.51 ended in 2001 and 2002 for the Workstation and Server editions, respectively. Windows 95. After Windows 3.11, Microsoft began to develop a new consumer-oriented version of the operating system codenamed Chicago. Chicago was designed to have support for 32-bit preemptive multitasking like OS/2 and Windows NT, although a 16-bit kernel would remain for the sake of backward compatibility. The Win32 API first introduced with Windows NT was adopted as the standard 32-bit programming interface, with Win16 compatibility being preserved through a technique known as thunking. A new object-oriented GUI was not originally planned as part of the release, although elements of the Cairo user interface were borrowed and added as other aspects of the release, notably plug and play, slipped. Microsoft did not change all of the Windows code to 32-bit. Parts of it remained 16-bit, albeit not directly using real mode, for reasons of compatibility, performance, and development time. Additionally, it was necessary to carry over design decisions from earlier versions of Windows for reasons of backwards compatibility, even if these design decisions no longer matched a more modern computing environment. These factors eventually began to impact the operating system's efficiency and stability. Microsoft marketing adopted Windows 95 as the product name for Chicago when it was released on August 24, 1995. Microsoft had a double gain from its release. First, it made it impossible for consumers to run Windows 95 on a cheaper, non-Microsoft DOS. Secondly, although traces of DOS were never completely removed from the system and MS-DOS 7 would be loaded briefly as a part of the booting process, Windows 95 applications ran solely in 386 enhanced mode, with a flat 32-bit address space and the logo of Windows 95 and 98 virtual memory. These features make it possible for Win32 applications to address up to 2 GB of virtual RAM, with another 2 GB reserved for the operating system, and in theory prevented them from inadvertently corrupting the memory space over the Win32 applications. In this respect, the functionality of Windows 95 moved closer to Windows NT, although Windows 95/98/me did not support more than 512 megabytes of physical RAM without obscure system tweaks. 3 years after its introduction, Windows 95 was succeeded by Windows 98. IBM continued to market